Thomas Graham built an empire from nothing. But beneath the titles and tailored suits, he hasn't set foot in his hometown school for decades, until today. Invited to a tense school board meeting about budget cuts, Thomas planned to sit quietly in the back. That is, until a 10-year-old boy asked one simple, heart-stopping question about a broken music program and a forgotten dream. In a town where kids are losing their chance to imagine bigger futures, Thomas is forced to confront the place and the people who once shaped his. Who is this boy with coding books and old library cards? And why does his voice sound so familiar? What unfolds next will change both their lives. Subscribe for more stories that prove it's never too late to give someone their second chance. The invitation arrived on a Wednesday. A plain envelope, no logo, just his name written in ink, Thomas Graham. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. Inside was a folded flyer for a school board meeting at Ashton Elementary, the place Thomas had once walked barefoot to on rainy mornings. A sticky note was attached. "Would be nice to see one of our own again. Mrs. Fletcher." Thomas hadn't been back to Ashton in nearly 30 years. Now 53, he sat in his high-rise office in downtown Chicago, floors above the city that praised him as a visionary. His company, Graham Tech, had shaped manufacturing systems across 4 continents. But for all his accolades and magazine covers, Thomas had always kept one door tightly shut, the one back to where it all began. That night, he found himself unable to sleep. The soft hum of the penthouse's climate system couldn't silence the echo of rain against his childhood home's leaky roof, or the static of old transistor radios his father used to fix at the kitchen table. Ashton wasn't just a place. It was a wound, one he covered with ambition, wealth, and distance. He poured himself a scotch, his second, and stared out at the skyline. The thought came unexpectedly. What if I went? Just to sit in the back, unseen. He didn't owe anyone anything, but somehow the idea refused to leave him alone. 3 days later, he pulled his Audi into a gravel parking lot behind Ashton Elementary. It hadn't changed much. The flagpole leaned slightly. The bricks had faded from red to rust. A few cars were already there, mostly aging sedans and one rusty truck with a bumper sticker that read, "Arts Matter." Thomas tightened his coat. It was early November, and the wind here didn't just cut, it remembered. Inside, the cafeteria had been hastily transformed into a makeshift meeting hall. Folding chairs packed the room. Parents, teachers, and even some students filled the space with a quiet tension. A banner hung overhead. Community Voices Matter, School Board Budget Forum. Thomas slipped into a seat in the last row. Up front, a woman in her 60s, gray curls pinned back tightly, was adjusting a microphone. Mrs. Fletcher. She hadn't changed a bit. She used to teach language arts, and once gave Thomas a used copy of To Kill a Mockingbird when he couldn't afford his own. She hadn't seen him yet. A man in a button-down shirt began speaking into the mic. Principal Harris, Thomas guessed. "Thank you all for coming. We're here to discuss budget constraints that will affect elective programs starting next semester. We're considering cuts to music, art, and library staff." A low murmur swept through the room. Thomas felt something twist in his chest. Music class, art, the library, the very places that had made school tolerable for him as a kid. They were more than rooms. They were escape routes. A hand went up, from a boy in the second row, maybe 10 years old. He had a shock of curly hair and sat beside an older woman who looked exhausted but proud. "Yes, son?" Principal Harris asked. The boy stood, voice clear and firm. What if someone became something big? Because of music class? Because of an old keyboard or broken trumpet? Silence fell. Thomas's throat tightened. The boy added, "If you take it away, maybe there won't be another someone like that." Thomas leaned forward, heart hammering. Something in the kid's face, The way he held his shoulders, his steady gaze, pulled at something buried deep inside him. The boy sat down. The room murmured again, this time softer. Thomas didn't move, didn't speak, but he remembered everything. The busted keyboard from the old music closet, which he took apart and rewired to build his first prototype. The music teacher who let him skip detention to tinker. That single class had set him on the path to scholarships, tech competitions, a life he never thought was possible. The meeting moved on. Arguments flared. Emotions cracked through parent voices. Numbers were cited. Yet, Thomas couldn't stop looking at the boy. That question, it hadn't been hypothetical, it had been personal. And the more Thomas looked, the more certain he became that boy wasn't just anyone. He reminded Thomas of someone else entirely. Someone he hadn't thought about in years. Someone who had once sent him letters from Ashton. Letters he'd never answered. Thomas couldn't shake the boy's voice from his mind. As the meeting dragged on, filled with budget charts, heated parent testimonies, and bureaucratic jargon, Thomas's attention drifted back to that simple question. What if someone became something big because of music class? He sat straighter in his chair, watching the boy more closely now. Every so often the child would glance toward the stage, his brow furrowed in concern far too heavy for someone his age. He leaned into his grandmother, who rubbed his back gently with a tenderness that spoke of years of sacrifice. Mrs. Fletcher finally took the mic again. Her voice, though older, still held the same quiet authority that had once silenced rowdy middle schoolers with a single look. "I've seen what the arts can do," she said. "Some of you may remember a student named Thomas Graham. He's not here today, but he sat right in those seats once. Back then, he wasn't a CEO. He was a quiet kid who spent hours in the library and took apart old speakers from the music room. If we had cut those programs back then, I don't know who he'd have become." Thomas's breath caught. He stared down at his shoes. She didn't know he was here. No one did. He'd slipped in without name tags, handshakes, or headlines. That had been the plan. Listen quietly, feel nothing, leave quickly. But that plan was unraveling. The boy stood again, his small frame barely clearing the back of the chair. "Mrs. Fletcher," he said politely, "Thomas Graham is the person I wrote to. I sent him a letter last month." The room turned toward him. Mrs. Fletcher tilted her head. "You did?" "Yes, ma'am," he said proudly. "I read that he started building things in this very school. I wanted to tell him thank you, and I asked if he might come back, just once." Thomas's heart sank into his stomach. The boy pulled out a crumpled envelope from his backpack. "I sent it to Graham Tech's main office. I even put extra stamps." A quiet laugh broke the tension in the room, but Thomas didn't laugh. Because he hadn't seen that letter. His assistant probably tossed it in the pile of hundreds marked fan mail or requests. His life was too busy, too filtered, too protected by people who decided what was worth his time. But this was worth his whole life. As the meeting ended, the boy's grandmother gently guided him to the hallway. Thomas hesitated. Every instinct told him to slip out the back door, back into the quiet anonymity he'd always preferred. But something deeper, something older, told him to stay. He rose, walked quickly, and caught them just before they reached the exit. "Excuse me," he said softly. The woman turned. Her expression was cautious but kind. The boy peeked around her arm. "I couldn't help overhearing," Thomas said, his voice faltering. "You mentioned sending a letter to Graham Tech?" The boy nodded. "It was to Mr. Graham. I didn't know if he'd ever read it, but I just wanted him to know that his story helped me." Thomas swallowed hard. "What's your name?" "Liam," the boy said. "Liam Carter." Thomas's breath left him in a rush. "Carter," he repeated, blinking. "Yes, sir. My grandma's name is Evelyn Carter. My mom was Claire." Evelyn's smile froze. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "You knew Claire?" she asked, her voice quiet but layered with something sharper. Thomas nodded slowly. "Yes, a long time ago, in high school." Evelyn's posture shifted, wariness giving way to stunned realization. "You're Thomas Graham." It wasn't a question. Thomas nodded again. "I didn't know about the letter, but I know I should have." Liam tilted his head. "Are you really him? The real Mr. Graham?" Thomas knelt beside him. "I am, and I'm sorry I didn't answer your letter. I wish I had." Liam pulled something from his pocket, a photo, folded and creased. It showed a young woman, smiling beside a baby wrapped in a faded blue blanket. "My mom," Liam said. "She passed away when I was 5. Grandma takes care of me now." Thomas stared at the photo. Claire. She hadn't changed much from high school, still had those laughing eyes and gentle features. His throat tightened as he did the math in his head. Liam was 10. And Claire. She had disappeared just after graduation. His mind spiraled. Could it be? He looked again at Liam. The resemblance was subtle, but unmistakable. The shape of his chin, the way his eyebrows furrowed when he was thinking. It was like looking at an echo of himself at that age. "I'm really glad you came tonight," Liam said suddenly, unaware of the storm he'd just ignited. "I hoped you'd understand why saving music class matters. It saved me." Thomas couldn't speak. Evelyn, still watching him closely, put a hand on Liam's shoulder. "Come on, sweetheart. Let's get home." As they walked away, Liam turned back and waved. "Goodbye, Mr. Graham." Thomas stood frozen. He had come to Ashton for closure. But now, everything had opened instead. And one question now consumed him entirely: was Liam his son's child? Thomas sat in his rental car long after the school parking lot had emptied, the image of Liam's face refusing to leave his mind. His fingers tapped against the steering wheel, restless, his mind drifting between memories he thought he'd buried and emotions he no longer knew how to name. Claire Carter. The name stirred something deep. Too deep. She'd been his high school sweetheart. Brilliant, kind, with a quiet strength that had steadied him through his most uncertain teenage years. But her family had struggled, and his family had made sure that struggle remained an unbridgeable distance. When she disappeared after graduation, he'd told himself it was her choice, that she had wanted something else, but now, staring at a wrinkled photo handed to him by a boy who looked far too much like him, that version of the past felt like a lie crafted for self-preservation. He opened his phone and dialed. "Marcy," he said as his assistant answered. "I need you to dig into the incoming mail logs for the last 8 weeks. Look for anything addressed personally to me, from a Liam Carter or Evelyn Carter, and check handwritten letters. Something might have been missed." "Of course, sir," Marcy said, surprised. "Any context?" "It's personal." There was a beat of silence before she replied, "I'll get back to you within the hour." Thomas drove through Ashton's quiet streets with no destination in mind, finally pulling into the old diner where he and Claire had once spent weekends dreaming about their futures. It looked the same, worn but full of memory. He didn't go in. He just sat there, letting the waves of nostalgia crash over him in silence. His phone buzzed. Marcy had sent a scanned image. His breath caught as he opened the file. There it was, a child's handwriting, uneven and heartfelt. "Dear Mr. Graham, my name is Liam Carter. I go to Ashton Elementary, and I heard that you used to go here too. They're going to cut music and library, and I don't think that's fair. I wanted to ask if maybe you could help us. You don't have to come, but it would mean a lot. Thank you, Liam." Beneath it, a drawing. A stick-figure boy holding a small keyboard, standing beside a taller man with glasses and messy hair. The sun was beaming above them. They were smiling. Thomas blinked away tears. "Why didn't I see this sooner?" he whispered bitterly to himself. The next morning he drove straight to the school office. Evelyn Carter was listed as Liam's emergency contact. It didn't take long to find her name and address, an aging duplex on the edge of town. He knocked gently, unsure of what he'd say. The door opened, and Evelyn stood there, holding a dish towel. Her eyes met his with a flicker of guarded recognition. "You came," she said softly. "I had to." She stepped aside. "He's at school." "I know. This visit is for you." Evelyn motioned toward the small kitchen table, cluttered with bills and a half-finished crossword. The air smelled like lemon cleaner and old coffee. She sat down across from him, folding her hands. "I didn't know," he began, his voice thick, "about Claire, about Liam." Evelyn studied him. "You didn't want to know back then." He swallowed hard. "Maybe not, but that boy, he has Claire's heart, and maybe mine, too." A long pause followed. "Claire loved you," Evelyn said finally. "But your world didn't leave room for her. When she found out she was pregnant, she planned to tell you, but then your family, your mother especially, made it clear she wasn't welcome." Thomas felt the old anger rise, but this time it wasn't aimed at Evelyn. "She never told me." "She tried," Evelyn said. "I was there. She sent letters. They were returned unopened. She even came to your office once, years ago. She was turned away." He sat back, stunned. "Why didn't she try again?" "Because people can only be rejected so many times before they stop hoping," Evelyn said, not unkindly. He nodded slowly. "I didn't know. I swear to you I didn't." "I believe you," she replied, "but that doesn't change the years that passed." "No," he said softly, "but maybe I can change what happens next." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "And what do you want to happen?" Thomas leaned forward. "I want to help. Not just with school funding or new instruments. I want to know him, spend time with him, if he'll let me, if you'll let me." Evelyn's expression was unreadable. "I have one condition," she said. "Name it." "Don't walk away when things get messy," she said firmly. "He's been abandoned too many times by people who promised otherwise. If you're not ready to stay, don't start." Thomas met her eyes, this time with a clarity that hadn't been there before. "I'm ready to stay." Evelyn nodded. "All right," she said quietly. "Then you can pick him up from school today." Thomas stood on the sidewalk outside Ashton Elementary, watching through the chain-link fence as children spilled from the double doors in the waves of laughter and backpacks. The sky above had a golden hue, early autumn sun casting long, slanted shadows on the cracked pavement. For a man who had once designed the future of urban innovation, the simple routine of school pickup felt like foreign territory, and yet, standing there, hands nervously stuffed into his jacket pockets, he felt more alive than he had in years. The bell rang, and then there he was, Liam. The boy walked with quiet purpose, his small frame weighed down by a second-hand backpack and an adult's sense of solitude. No one walked beside him. No one called his name. He glanced up and stopped cold when he saw Thomas. Their eyes locked. "Hi," Thomas said gently, stepping forward. "Your grandma said I could come." Liam blinked, clutching his backpack strap tighter. "Why?" Thomas crouched to his level. "Because I wanted to, and because I read your letter." Liam's lips parted slightly in surprise. "You did?" Thomas nodded. "Every word." Liam looked away, embarrassed, then back again. "Are you the man who sent the computer?" Thomas smiled. "Guilty." For a second, Liam didn't move, then he gave a single, cautious nod. Thanks, it's really fast. That's good. I hoped you'd like it. Thomas stood slowly. Want to grab some ice cream before we head to your place? Liam studied him again, the way children do when trying to decide if someone's pretending or being real. Can I get 2 scoops? Thomas chuckled. That's non-negotiable. They walked in silence for the first few blocks, the sounds of neighborhood life wrapping gently around them. When they reached the corner creamery, Liam pointed. That's where I go with Grandma on good days. Well, Thomas said, pulling open the door, today feels like a good day to me. Inside, Liam chose mint chip and vanilla. Thomas stuck with classic chocolate. They sat on the bench outside, the paper napkins already battling the melting edges. So, Liam asked between bites, why'd you come to the school meeting if you didn't want to talk? Thomas licked his cone thoughtfully. Because sometimes, when you've been away too long, it's hard to know what to say. But you're rich. Grown-ups always talk when they're rich. The honesty made Thomas laugh softly, though there was a sting in it. I used to think money fixed everything, he admitted, but I'm starting to realize it can't fix the things that matter most. Like what? Like missed time, like people you should have been there for. He hesitated, like a son who needed his dad to believe in him. Liam looked down at his shoes. My mom says my dad would have liked music, that he played guitar. He did, Thomas said, his voice tight. He had this clumsy old acoustic that was always out of tune, but he played it anyway, loud. Liam smiled faintly. Mom hums sometimes when she does dishes. Grandma says it's her way of remembering. I think she's right. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The breeze carried the scent of leaves and distant barbecue, the kind of peaceful quiet that invited reflection. You knew him, didn't you? Liam asked suddenly. My dad? Thomas's throat tightened. He nodded slowly. Yes, I knew him very well. Then why didn't you ever come find us? The question pierced him. He looked at the boy, this child who bore his son's quiet eyes and curious mind, and he answered with all the honesty he had. Because I didn't know you existed, and because I was too proud to make things right with your mom when it mattered most. Liam looked away, his lips tightening as he processed the answer. Then, softly, Are you sorry? Yes, Thomas said without hesitation. More than you can imagine. Liam swung his legs under the bench. If I let you come around sometimes, do you promise not to leave again? Thomas's heart twisted. He knelt beside the boy, eye to eye. I can't promise I'll do everything right, but I promise this. I'm not going anywhere. Not this time. Liam nodded, wiping ice cream from his chin with the back of his sleeve. Okay, he said quietly. But next time, we get hot fudge too. Thomas laughed, a deep, healing laugh that felt like something was finally cracking open in his chest. Deal. As they walked back toward Evelyn's duplex, Liam pointed out small things. His favorite tree, the corner with the best chalk drawings, the house where a dog always barked at him like it was his job. And Thomas listened. He really listened. Because this was no longer about making up for the past. This was about building something entirely new. The next few days unfolded in quiet, unexpected ways. Thomas Graham, who once spent his mornings buried in quarterly earnings reports and his nights under artificial city lights, was now learning how to tie a child's shoelace properly and trying not to burn toast in Evelyn's tiny kitchen. The first morning he dropped Liam off at school, he stood awkwardly at the gate, unsure if he was supposed to wave or just nod. Liam beat him to it with a small grin and a quiet, "See you later," then disappeared into the crowd of kids like mist into morning sun. Thomas remained still for a few seconds longer, his heart, oddly, full, then turned and made his way back to Evelyn's. She was waiting at the door with a cup of tea, as if she had known. I'm not very good at this, he said, taking the mug. No one is at first, she replied with a gentle shrug. "But you showed up. That's more than most do." Inside, the living room was cluttered with Liam's drawings, sketches of buildings, robotic dinosaurs, and musical notes scribbled beside pixelated hearts. Thomas picked one up, smiling at a crude spaceship that looked suspiciously like his company's first tech satellite design. "He's talented," he said, holding the page out to Evelyn. "He's more than that," she replied, settling into her worn recliner. "He's resilient. Claire taught him that." At the mention of Liam's mother, a silence fell between them. Thomas took a deep breath and sat on the edge of the couch. "What happened between me and Claire?" he began carefully. "I was wrong. I was cruel." Evelyn gave him a long, tired look. "You were scared and entitled, and like most men with power, you thought being right was more important than being kind." He flinched, but he didn't argue. "I didn't think she was good enough for my son," he admitted, ashamed. "I didn't want her to hold him back." "She didn't," Evelyn said sharply. "She raised a boy who loves deeply, who builds things out of scraps, who never complains when there's no dinner until morning." Thomas looked down at his hands. "She did more with less than you've ever had to." He nodded slowly. "I believe that now." For a moment, the only sound was the ticking of the old clock in the hallway. "She's sick," Evelyn added quietly. Thomas looked up. "She's been hiding it. Doctor says it's manageable for now, but she needs rest. More than that, she needs stability." The gravity of it settled over him like thick fog. "What can I do?" Evelyn hesitated. "You're already doing it. Just don't walk away again. That boy's had enough people disappear on him." Later that evening, Thomas returned with bags of groceries and a box labeled Starter Art Supplies. Evelyn arched a brow at the indulgent gesture, but said nothing. When Liam got home from school and opened the kit, his eyes lit up like city lights in winter. "Can I use the big table?" he asked breathlessly, already pulling out pastels and charcoal sticks. "Of course," Thomas said, clearing the surface with a sweep of his arm. "Just don't draw on me if I fall asleep." Liam giggled. As he began, sketching with impressive focus, Thomas stood by the doorway, arms crossed, a rare softness in his expression. The boy didn't need prompting. He didn't need structure. He just needed space and someone who believed the art was worth making. "Can I show you something?" Liam asked suddenly. Thomas nodded. Liam opened his old-school folder and pulled out a torn, yellowed sheet. It was a letter, crumpled, but carefully kept. "I wrote this when they said the library was closing," Liam explained. "I didn't know where to send it, so I just put Mr. CEO on the envelope and left it at the office front desk when we walked past one day." Thomas unfolded the paper. The handwriting was shaky, but every word hit like a stone skipping across his soul. "Dear Mr. CEO, I don't want to be rich. I just want to learn. The books help me. My grandma says dreaming is free, but someone has to pay for books." His throat tightened. "I didn't know it was you," Liam said quietly, "until you showed up." Thomas looked down at the boy who reminded him so much of his son, not just in his eyes but in his unwavering spirit. "I didn't know I needed to be found," Thomas replied. From the kitchen, Evelyn watched the two with a hand pressed to her chest. Quietly, she wiped her eyes. Later that night, after Liam had fallen asleep with charcoal smudges on his cheek and a sketch of a city skyline on the table, Thomas sat with Evelyn under the soft lamplight. "He should have more than this," he said gently. "He deserves more." "He deserves to be loved," Evelyn replied. "Everything else comes after." Thomas nodded. "Then I need to start thinking bigger." Evelyn met his gaze. "You always did think in skyscrapers. Just don't forget, his dreams fit inside sidewalk chalk and second-hand crayons." Thomas smiled, a little broken, a little healing. And, in that quiet, He began to imagine a world that didn't just run on profit. It ran on people. And one small boy who still believed in the power of showing up. Claire stood by the window of her apartment the next morning, watching the buses rumble past beneath a sky still trying to make up its mind between rain and light. Her hands trembled as she cradled the cup of weak coffee Evelyn had brought up hours earlier. She hadn't slept much, not because of pain, though it lingered in her chest like an unwanted visitor, but because of Thomas. Because he'd come back after all these years. Not as a ghost to haunt her, but as something more complicated, present, real, changed, and that scared her more than anything. She heard the familiar knock, 2 short, 1 long, Liam's pattern. But when she opened the door, it wasn't her son, it was Thomas. He stood in the hallway with a paper bag in one hand and hesitation in his eyes. "I brought breakfast," he said, lifting the bag like an olive branch. "It's mostly edible. I had help." Claire stared at him, arms crossed. "You don't have to keep showing up, Thomas." "I know," he replied, voice steady. "But I want to." She let out a tired breath and stepped aside. "Just don't confuse Liam. He's got enough going on without more false hope." Thomas entered quietly, placing the bag on the small counter. He glanced around the apartment. The chipped paint, the second-hand furniture, the stack of bills tucked under a magnet shaped like a cat on the fridge. It wasn't pity he felt. It was guilt and awe. She had raised Liam in a world without cushion, without guarantees, and done it with strength he hadn't understood until now. "I'm not here to confuse him," he said gently. "Or to take over. I'm here to listen, if you'll let me." Claire hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Fine, but if you step out again this time, don't expect us to wait." Later that afternoon, Evelyn called Thomas from the porch, her voice tight with concern. "You need to get down here. There's been a situation." When he arrived at the shelter, Liam was sitting on the front steps, his knees pulled up to his chest, his face buried in his arms. A woman with a clipboard and too much perfume was standing nearby, gesturing dramatically. "I was told this place would be quiet. Safe," she said, annoyed. "Now, some child is just yelling in the reading room?" Thomas approached cautiously, kneeling beside Liam. "Hey," he said softly. "What happened?" Liam didn't look up. "They're taking the library. The district voted to shut it down, said it's a waste of space." Thomas's heart clenched. The library was where Liam taught himself coding, where he found warmth on cold days, where he first dreamed of building things that mattered. "I tried to tell them," Liam muttered, "but they wouldn't listen." Thomas stood and faced the woman. "He's upset because a resource he needs is being taken away. Maybe instead of reporting him, you could ask why he's fighting so hard." She blinked. "Are you his father?" Thomas paused, then answered firmly. "No, but I'm someone who cares." That night, after Liam had calmed and fallen asleep on the shelter's worn-out sofa, Thomas stayed behind with Evelyn. "I want to do something," he said. "You already are," she replied. "No," he said, more firmly now. "Something bigger. That library, the school, it's all connected. These kids are being silenced before they ever find their voice." Evelyn looked at him with tired but grateful eyes. "What are you thinking?" "I want to attend the next school board meeting," Thomas said, "publicly. Not as some shadow donor, not behind the scenes." She raised a brow. "Are you ready for that? For the press? The headlines?" "No," he admitted, "but Liam deserves someone who shows up loudly, not just privately." Claire wasn't thrilled when she found out. "You're turning this into a publicity stunt." "It's not for me," Thomas said calmly. "It's for him, and for every other kid who feels like their voice doesn't matter." She shook her head. "You don't get to play the hero, Thomas. Not after all this time." "I'm not playing anything," he said quietly. I'm finally listening. When the day of the school board meeting arrived, Thomas walked into the crowded auditorium in Ashton with his head high. Parents filled the rows, some angry, some indifferent. A few recognized him. Most didn't. The superintendent opened the discussion with the usual droning about budget cuts, prioritizing STEM over the arts, and real-world readiness. Liam sat in the third row with Evelyn, his face tense, his hands fidgeting with a paperclip. When the mic opened for questions, a teacher stood, then a parent. Then, a small hand rose. "Liam," the superintendent said, a little surprised, "this is for adults." "I have a question," Liam said, standing tall. "If someone becomes something great, because of something you're about to take away, how will you fix that?" The room fell into a hush. Thomas closed his eyes briefly and smiled. The silence that followed Liam's question lingered longer than anyone expected. Grown men and women who had filled the room with complaints and justifications moments earlier now stared at the boy with wide eyes, some ashamed, others uncertain how to respond. From his seat near the aisle, Thomas watched, his throat tightening. He had prepared to speak himself, to deliver a well-composed plea backed by logic and statistics. But Liam's question, simple, raw, honest, had pierced deeper than any speech ever could. If someone becomes something great because of what you're about to take away, how will you fix that? The superintendent cleared his throat, visibly rattled. "Thank you, Liam. We appreciate the passion, but the board has very difficult decisions to make." Thomas rose, slowly. "Then let me make it easier," he said, his voice calm yet firm as he stepped toward the microphone. A few gasps rippled through the room as people recognized him. Whispers surged like wind before a storm. "Mr. Graham?" someone near the back said, surprised. He nodded once. "Yes, I'm Thomas Graham. I grew up here, sat in these same plastic chairs, and I remember when this town invested in kids like me, kids who didn't have much, but were rich in dreams." The room stilled again, people shifting to pay closer attention. Even the board members leaned forward. "I wasn't planning to speak today," he continued, his tone deepening. "But when that boy stood up, when Liam asked the question you couldn't answer, it reminded me of the first time I ever opened up a keyboard in Mr. Ellison's music class. It was a broken electronic piano. Half the keys didn't work, but I rebuilt it in my garage. That was the first thing I ever made." Thomas looked toward Liam, who was now sitting frozen in his chair, wide-eyed. "I didn't become an engineer because someone handed me a coding manual," Thomas said. "I became one because I was inspired by music, by curiosity, by teachers who made space for wonder." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Cut the budget if you must," he said, "but do it knowing you're not trimming fat. You're amputating futures." A ripple of applause broke out from a few parents in the audience. The board chairwoman tried to interject, but Thomas raised a hand. "I've reviewed your numbers," he said, glancing briefly at a folder he pulled from his bag, "and I'm willing to personally fund the continuation of the arts programs, library staffing, and 2 additional STEM positions. No strings, no branding, no press releases." That sent a buzz through the auditorium. Someone stood up and cheered. Another parent clapped, then another. Within seconds, a standing ovation built. Quiet at first, but heartfelt. Thomas looked over to Claire, who stood in the back doorway with Evelyn. Her eyes glistened, but her expression was unreadable. Not praise, not disapproval, just watching. After the meeting, Liam ran up to him, breathless. "You really did that?" Thomas bent slightly to meet his eye. "I just followed your lead, kid. You cracked the silence wide open." Liam's eyes sparkled, then dimmed with concern. "They won't still close the library, will they?" "No," Thomas said firmly. "Not anymore." They exited the school building together, the buzz of conversation trailing behind them. Reporters had started to gather outside, and Thomas instinctively shielded Liam with his arm. But just as they reached the parking lot, a voice rang out over the crowd. "There he is, the man using a kid's story to promote his brand." A suited man stepped forward, microphone in hand, camera crew behind him. "Mr. Graham, are you using this mentorship for a publicity campaign tied to your company's school tech initiative?" Thomas froze, stunned. Claire's voice cut through before he could answer. "He's not using anyone." She stepped between the reporter and Thomas, standing tall beside Liam. "He didn't ask for attention. He's been helping quietly for weeks, paying medical bills, buying books, listening." The reporter narrowed his eyes. "And who are you?" "I'm his mother," Claire said steadily, "and I don't need a PR team to tell me when someone's finally doing the right thing for the right reasons." The crew backed off slightly as Evelyn ushered Liam toward the car. Later that night, Claire found Thomas sitting on the steps of the shelter, a cup of untouched tea in his hands. "You okay?" she asked gently. "I didn't expect it to feel like that," he said. "Being questioned, accused." Claire lowered herself beside him. "It's what happens when you finally step into the light. You draw shadows." He looked at her, weary but sincere. "I'm not trying to fix the past. I know I can't, but I want to build something new with what's left of the time I have." Claire watched him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then keep showing up," she said, "not with donations, with presence." The morning after the school board meeting felt different. The usual stillness of the shelter's common room was replaced with a low hum, residents whispering about the news clips circulating online. Thomas Graham's speech had gone viral overnight. Some called it powerful, others political. But for Claire, who stood in the kitchen stirring a pot of oatmeal, it was personal. Liam sat at the table, bent over a small laptop Thomas had quietly gifted weeks ago. Claire had tried to resist at first, pridefully. But Liam's face lit up so purely when the device powered on, she hadn't had the heart. "Mom," Liam asked, not looking up, "are we going to get in trouble because of the meeting?" Claire turned from the stove slowly. "Why would we be in trouble?" "I don't know," he mumbled. "That guy said Mr. Graham was using me. What if people think I lied, or I'm just some poor kid trying to get famous?" Claire knelt beside him, brushing his hair back. "You told the truth. That's all you did. And the right people heard you." Liam looked down again, uncertain. "He's coming by today, right?" "Yes, after his meeting." She paused. "But, Liam, you know he's been helping us, right? Quietly. Long before that speech." Liam nodded. "He's different. He doesn't act like a rich guy." Claire smiled sadly. Maybe he's trying to remember who he was before all that. That afternoon, Thomas arrived with a large tote bag slung over his shoulder and a tired smile on his face. "Hope I'm not interrupting." "You're fine," Claire said, stepping aside. "We were just finishing homework." Liam ran to him. "You said you'd show me how to make the soundboard today." Thomas nodded and set the bag on the table. "And I brought a surprise." Inside was a bundle of salvaged wires, tiny speakers, and a circuit board. Liam's eyes widened. "You're really going to teach me?" "I'm not just going to teach you," Thomas said, pulling out a soldering kit. "We're going to build it together." As the hours passed, Claire watched from the doorway. The living room transformed into a makeshift lab, the air thick with concentration and gentle laughter. Liam asked 100 questions, and Thomas answered every one patiently. It was more than mentorship, it was repair, not just of broken machines, but of something deeper in both of them. Later that evening, Claire sat across from Thomas while Liam worked silently in the corner, adjusting a coil on their near-completed device. "You know, it's not lost on me," Claire began, her voice softer than usual. "What you've done for him, for us." Thomas set down his coffee. "I didn't do it for thanks." "I know," she said, That's why it matters." She hesitated before adding, "He's starting to see you as more than a mentor." Thomas swallowed, nodding. "And I see him as more than just a bright kid I want to help." Claire looked down. "He doesn't have anyone else, Thomas. I'm trying, but it's been hard. I wasn't supposed to do this alone." "You're not alone anymore," he said gently. She looked up sharply, her expression uncertain. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying, if you'd be open to it, I'd like to be part of his life, not just as a visitor or donor, but something lasting, someone he can count on." Claire's eyes shimmered. "You really mean that?" "I do," he said. "But I want your blessing, and his. I know I've made mistakes, ones I can't undo. But I've got time left, and I want to spend it building, not erasing." Before Claire could answer, Liam interrupted, waving his device triumphantly. "It works! Look!" He pressed a small button, and a digital chime echoed through the room. "I can record sound samples now." "That's amazing," Claire said. Thomas smiled. "You did that, Liam. You built something from nothing." Liam beamed, then looked between them. "Mom? Mr. Graham? Can I ask you something?" Claire nodded. "Of course." "If I could have any last name in the world, could it be Graham?" Claire gasped softly. Thomas froze, overwhelmed. "You mean that?" Thomas asked, his voice catching. Liam shrugged, trying to sound casual. "You kind of feel like my dad sometimes. Not in a weird way, just like you care even when I mess up." Thomas knelt in front of him. "You never have to earn that, Liam. Caring isn't a reward, it's a promise." Claire quietly turned away, wiping tears before either of them could see. That night, after Liam went to bed, she joined Thomas on the front steps of the shelter. "I'm scared," she admitted. "So am I," he said. "But maybe," she whispered. "Being scared means it's worth it." Thomas looked out at the quiet street, lights flickering in the distance. "Then let's be scared together, for him." And in that moment, under a sky just beginning to gather stars, a new kind of family began to take shape. One not built by blood, but by choice, by presence, and by a second chance neither of them thought they'd get. The next few days passed in a blur of cautious joy. Word of Thomas's powerful speech and the viral video of him standing beside Liam had spread fast. News crews began calling the school. Social media buzzed with hashtags like #SecondChances and @Graham and Liam, painting their story as a modern miracle. But with the attention came pressure. At the shelter, Claire was bombarded with questions she didn't know how to answer. Is he adopting Liam? Are they moving? What does this mean for your family? She kept her head down, focusing on work and cooking, trying not to let her growing anxiety show. She'd spent years learning how to survive in quiet, how to protect her son from chaos. Now, even the good kind of chaos felt like too much. Inside the shelter's small rec room, Liam sat with Thomas, legs crossed, working on a new project, a voice-operated interface. It was Liam's idea. "So, kids who can't move much can still use tech," he'd explained earnestly. Thomas listened with an admiration that surprised even him. This wasn't about charity anymore. Liam had started to change him, reminding him of things long buried: purpose, patience, love. As Liam rattled off possible code lines, Thomas's phone buzzed. A message from his attorney. "Urgent. Need to review airship claim. Extended family member surfaced." His stomach turned. Later that evening, after Liam had gone to bed, Thomas met Claire in the modest hallway outside the boys' room. She looked tired, like sleep had been a stranger for weeks. "We need to talk," he said gently. Claire nodded. "I figured." They walked outside into the soft night. The streetlights hummed overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Claire pulled her coat tighter. "There's been a development," Thomas said, voice cautious. "My cousin, Mark. We haven't spoken in over a decade, but somehow he found out about Liam." Claire looked at him, bracing. "And?" "He's filed a challenge," Thomas continued, "claiming that I'm being manipulated and that Liam, without paternity proof, can't be my heir." Claire's eyes narrowed. "What does he want?" "The money," Thomas said bluntly, "and the name." Claire scoffed. "Of course. Suddenly everyone wants to be part of your life." Thomas looked down, shame knotting in his chest. "This is my fault. If I hadn't been so public, if I'd just moved quieter—" "No," Claire interrupted, her voice firm. "You did what you thought was right. You stood up for Liam. That matters more than how loud it got." He studied her face, the lines of exhaustion, the quiet courage. "I want to fight this, but I can't do it without you, or without Liam." Claire nodded slowly. "What do you need?" "A birth certificate," he said hesitantly, "with his last name so to... if you're willing." Claire looked away, pain flickering across her expression. "I never put a father's name. Not because I didn't want to, but I didn't know if anyone would ever care." Thomas stepped closer. "I care. I've never cared more about anything." For a long moment she said nothing. Then, "And if Liam doesn't want to change his name?" "Then he doesn't," Thomas replied without hesitation. "He decides. All I want is to give him options. A future that's his." Claire nodded again, this time more slowly, more solidly. "Then we talk to him, together." The next afternoon, they sat with Liam at the shelter's common table where just weeks ago he'd first drawn diagrams on napkins for his tech ideas. Thomas cleared his throat. "Buddy, can we talk to you for a sec?" Liam looked up, curious but unafraid. "There's been some noise since the school meeting," Claire began. "People asking questions, some trying to make things harder than they need to be." Thomas added, "But none of that changes what we feel for you, what I feel for you." Liam nodded. "Okay." Claire glanced at Thomas, then continued gently. "One of those questions is about your last name, about whether you want to keep it or change it." Liam blinked. "You mean, become Liam Graham?" Thomas held his breath. "You don't have to," Claire rushed to add. "Only if it feels right." Liam was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Do I have to stop being me?" Thomas smiled, his eyes misting. "Never. You'd still be the same brilliant, kind, stubborn kid, just with one more piece of your story." Liam looked between them, his small hands folded tightly. Then he said, almost shyly, "I'd like that. I think I'd like to be a Graham." Thomas closed his eyes briefly, overwhelmed. When he opened them, Claire was smiling through tears. "Then it's done," she said, reaching for her son's hand. That night, as Thomas signed the first set of documents with his lawyer, a headline quietly hit the local news. "Billionaire CEO names shelter boy as legal heir. A new legacy begins." But inside the modest shelter room, it wasn't about headlines or legal claims. It was about a child leaning against a man who had once forgotten how to love, and had now found the courage to begin again. Liam turned to Thomas just before drifting to sleep. "Hey, if I get the name, does that mean I get the jacket too?" Thomas laughed softly. "Let's start with the name. The jacket might take a few more chores." "Deal," Liam whispered, already halfway to dreaming. And Thomas sat beside him long after he'd fallen asleep, thinking not of money or legacy, but of belonging and the quiet, immeasurable power of being chosen. The days that followed were filled with a quiet kind of transformation, not just in name, but in rhythm, in spirit, in how Liam moved through the world, and how Thomas walked beside him. For the first time, the boy didn't have to flinch when someone asked about his last name, when his teacher called roll and hesitated at the unfamiliar addition. Liam. Graham? He had smiled and said, "Yeah, that's me." And yet, the storm hadn't passed. Thomas knew better than to think the world would step aside because of sentiment. His cousin Mark had doubled down, filing for an emergency injunction claiming elder coercion and mental incompetence, an ugly smear campaign built on nothing but old bitterness and greed. Thomas sat across from his lawyer, Joel Winters, in a downtown Denver office tower. The city's skyline glittered beyond the wide windows, but his attention remained on the man who'd handled his affairs for 2 decades. "We can fight this," Joel said, adjusting his glasses. "We've beaten worse." Thomas sighed. "But not with Liam at the center of a courtroom." Joel hesitated. "You're right. A custody battle, a competency hearing, it'll be a circus. And it'll hurt him. Hurt Claire." Thomas leaned back, rubbing his temples. "I don't care about the money. If I have to walk away from all of it, I will." Joel looked surprised. "Thomas, you built that empire from scratch." "I know," Thomas said quietly, "but this is my second chance, and I won't let it turn into their battlefield." That night, back at the shelter, Claire was waiting in the courtyard. Liam was inside playing with donated Lego bricks, assembling something that looked suspiciously like a prototype for a robotic arm. Thomas joined her on the bench, the air brisk with the first hints of winter. "Mark's pushing for a hearing," he said softly. Claire's jaw tensed. "He doesn't even know Liam." Thomas nodded. "But he knows I care, and that's enough for him to attack." Claire turned toward him. "So what do we do?" "We pivot," Thomas replied. "I step back, publicly. We let the trust be managed anonymously. I'll fund Liam's future quietly, the way I should have all along." Claire's eyes searched his face. "And what about you? About being his father, not just on paper?" "I'll still be there," Thomas said. "Every morning before school, every night for bedtime stories. But the headlines? They won't include my name, only his." Claire was quiet for a long moment. "You'd really give all that up? For him?" Thomas turned toward the window where Liam knelt, tongue between his teeth, focused intently on a tiny circuit board he'd found. "I already have," he said. The next morning, Thomas released a formal statement to the press. In it, he clarified that no portion of the Graham estate would be dispersed to heirs until a restructured trust was finalized, one governed by independent fiduciaries. No family members, no boardroom sharks. Just legal safeguards and a clear focus: education, stability, and future innovation. The media frenzy died down almost instantly. Mark's legal team backed off when the scent of money faded from the air. But the public didn't forget. A few weeks later, at the Ashton Community Center, something unexpected happened. The school board had invited Liam to present a small talk during their Future Leaders Night. He nearly turned it down, too nervous, but Claire reminded him of how far he'd come. And so, with his shirt tucked in and a cardboard trifold display beside him, Liam Graham stood up in front of 50 adults and 7 nervous middle schoolers. "My name is Liam Graham," he began, voice cracking only once. "I used to think family was something you're born with, but I learned it's also something you build. Sometimes, it finds you when you're not looking." He paused, scanning the crowd until his eyes met Thomas's, who sat at the very back, proud and impossibly still. "This community helped me believe I mattered," Liam continued. "So I want to help others believe it too. My project is about accessible tech for kids with disabilities. I want them to feel seen, the way someone once saw me." The room was silent. Even the board members shifted in their seats. And then a slow, strong clap began, from Thomas. One clap, then another, until the whole room joined in. Afterward, Thomas found Liam outside, pacing under the soft streetlight, cheeks flushed. "You were amazing," Thomas said, voice thick. Liam looked up at him. "I messed up a word." "Didn't notice," Thomas replied. "All I saw was a leader." Liam smiled. "Did I really sound like one?" Thomas crouched to his level. "You didn't just sound like one, Liam. You are one." The boy's smile faded a little, replaced by something deeper, vulnerability wrapped in wonder. "Do you think Dad would have liked me?" Thomas felt the wind knock from his lungs. He nodded, slowly. "He'd have loved you, kid. Same way I do." And in that moment, under that flickering street lamp, the weight of loss gave way to something fuller, something finally whole. The holiday season arrived in Ashton with the quiet charm only small towns know how to deliver. Hand-written window signs, mismatched lights strung along rooftops, and the warm smell of cinnamon drifting from the bakery on Main Street. The town was, for once, alive with hope. For Thomas, every ornament, every candlelit sidewalk was a reminder. He hadn't just returned to a place. He'd returned to purpose. Liam had taken to calling him Mr. T when they were joking, and Uncle Thomas in more formal settings, though recently, after one especially long bedtime conversation, he'd softly tried out Dad. Thomas didn't correct him. Claire had noticed but said nothing. Her silences, once lined with steel, had softened into something like peace. They weren't a couple, at least not yet, but their bond had deepened into something unmistakably familial. At dinner, they passed dishes like old friends. In quieter moments, their hands would linger a little too long brushing against each other at the kitchen sink. And yet, time was not a silent guest. It reminded them that Claire's mother, Liam's beloved grandmother, was fading quickly. In early January, Thomas and Claire stood together in the sterile hallway of St. Vincent's Hospice, watching Liam read aloud to his grandmother from a tattered science fiction novel. She barely stirred anymore, but her fingers twitched faintly at the sound of his voice. Claire's eyes were glassy. "She raised me alone, worked nights at the diner just to keep me in school. She never asked for anything. She doesn't need to now," Thomas said gently. "You've given her everything that matters. A daughter with strength, a grandson with a future." Claire looked up at him. "And you?" Thomas hesitated. "She gave me something I never thought I'd have again, a reason to stay." The funeral was small and intimate. Family and friends, neighbors who remembered the kindness of a woman who once baked for every birthday on the block. Liam held Thomas's hand the entire time. He didn't cry at the gravesite, but that night, in the quiet of his room, the tears came like a storm. Thomas sat beside him, running a steady hand down the boy's back as he wept into the sheets. "She was the only one who believed I was special," Liam sobbed. Thomas leaned in. "She wasn't the only one, and she knew you'd have people after her, people who'd never stop believing in you." Liam turned to him, eyes raw. "Promise?" "On my life," Thomas whispered. Spring in Ashton bloomed slowly. Thomas spent more time in the community than he ever had in any boardroom. He helped repaint the library, funded new tech labs at the local high school, and volunteered to judge the science fair, though he recused himself from Liam's entry, of course. Liam's invention, a low-cost prosthetic hand built from recycled 3D printer parts, won the top prize. But it wasn't the trophy that made Thomas tear up. It was what Liam said during his presentation. "This is for anyone who was told they couldn't, for anyone who lost someone and thought they had to carry that alone. I thought I was alone, but I wasn't. I just hadn't found him yet." He turned then, searching the crowd, locking eyes with Thomas. "You know who you are," he added. The audience applauded. Thomas just stood there, motionless, hand pressed to his chest as if trying to steady the ache that filled it. That night, back at the house, Claire lit a fire and poured them both a glass of cider. Liam was asleep, one hand curled around the corner of his science fair poster. "You've changed him," she said softly. Thomas shook his head. "He changed me." Claire watched him for a long moment, then set her glass down. "I want to talk about custody." Thomas sat straighter. "I want you to be his legal guardian," she continued. "We share that responsibility now. I see it, I trust it, and I want it on paper." He blinked. "Claire, are you sure?" Her voice trembled just slightly. "You've given him the things I can't. Stability, confidence, a vision of what he could be." Thomas reached across the table, gently taking her hand. "I'll be there every step of the way, for both of you." A silence settled between them. It wasn't heavy, it was full of understanding, mutual respect, a love that had taken its time but grown deep roots. "Let's start the paperwork," she said. And Thomas, for the first time in years, didn't feel like he was gaining something. He felt like he was finally coming home. The summer sun broke over Ashton like a promise. Soft golden rays stretching over the dew-slick grass of the town's modest public auditorium. Inside, rows of folding chairs filled quickly with parents, teachers, community members, and a few scattered reporters, all murmuring with anticipation. At the front of the stage stood a table draped in blue velvet, holding a single glass trophy shaped like a circuit board over a book. It was Liam's day. Thomas adjusted his tie in the mirror backstage, though he no longer cared much for appearances. Today wasn't about business or legacy or optics. Today was about honoring a boy who had reminded him what life could be if you chose love over fear, family over pride. Claire smoothed the shoulders of Liam's blazer and kissed his forehead. "Ready?" Liam, now 12, nodded solemnly, but when he turned to Thomas, his expression cracked into a bright, nervous grin. "You sure I won't mess this up?" Thomas knelt to meet his eyes. "Son, you've already made me proud. Whatever happens up there, that's just a cherry on top." Liam blinked. "You called me son." "I did." Thomas's voice was firm, yet hushed. "Because you are." The boy's lip trembled before he threw his arms around Thomas's neck in a tight, wordless embrace. Claire turned away, discreetly, blinking back tears. Moments later, Liam stepped up to the microphone, clutching his note cards with shaking fingers. The auditorium fell silent. "My name is Liam Hayes," he began, "and today I want to talk about second chances." He paused, glanced down at the cards, then folded them in half and tucked them into his jacket pocket. "Actually, I want to speak from the heart." A hush of reverent curiosity swept through the room. "Not long ago, I didn't think anyone saw me. I lived in a small apartment with my grandma, and I spent my afternoons in a school library that was falling apart. I taught myself from old books because no one thought I deserved anything new. When they said they'd cut the library, I didn't know where to turn, so I wrote a letter to someone I didn't expect to show up." He looked over to the front row. Thomas sat next to Claire, both watching him with quiet awe. "But he did," Liam continued. "He didn't just donate money or sign checks. He listened. He stayed. He showed up when I needed a teacher, and when I needed a dad." A collective gasp whispered through the room, followed by the kind of silence that only truth can command. "This trophy," Liam said, gesturing to the table beside him, "isn't mine alone. It belongs to everyone who gave me a second chance, to the librarians who let me stay after hours, to the teachers who bought their own supplies, to my mom, who fought so hard, and to the man who walked back into this town and found something more valuable than a company." He smiled. He found a family. A standing ovation erupted, not out of politeness but deep, genuine admiration. Liam stepped back, cheeks flushed, as applause rained down like sunlight through stained glass. That evening, they returned home to the little house Thomas had renovated just outside town. It wasn't a mansion or a high-rise penthouse. It was warm, lived in, and filled with framed pictures, Liam's sketches, Claire's garden in full bloom, the three of them laughing over spilled flour in the kitchen. At dinner, Claire lit a single candle and passed around paper napkins decorated with Liam's hand-drawn rockets and robots. Thomas raised a glass of lemonade. "To second chances," he said. "To first families," Liam added. They clinked glasses. Later that night, Liam slipped a wrapped package into Thomas's hands. "Open it." Inside was a book, hand-bound, titled The Invention of Us. Thomas opened to the first page. It read, "To the man who didn't just save me, but chose me." His throat tightened. "You wrote this?" "And illustrated it," Liam beamed. "It's our story." Thomas looked up, voice rough. "It's perfect." Outside the window, fireflies blinked across the yard, and Claire stepped onto the porch to water the plants, humming softly. A melody Thomas had almost forgotten but now cherished like breath. As he watched Liam curl up with a new science magazine and a bowl of popcorn, Thomas finally understood what his wealth was meant for. Not stock options or mergers, not quarterly gains. But moments like this. A family built not by blood alone, but by love. Deliberately chosen, fiercely protected, and never taken for granted. He set the book down, stepped into the hallway, and picked up the framed photo on the table. One of Liam's first drawings. It showed 3 stick figures under a blue sky. One held a wrench, one a flower. The smallest held a heart. In the corner, in crooked handwriting, it read, "Home." And for the first time in his long accomplished life, Thomas Graham whispered a prayer of gratitude, not for what he'd achieved, but for who he'd become.